yourself.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Peter Schmitting speaking. Welcome to the Hybrid TESTFEST webinar, the first webinar of today. I think attendees are still coming in, so let's wait another minute to give people a chance to connect to the webinar. Okay, maybe let's start then. I think people may still be coming in during the next minutes. But anyway, let's get started. We said 2 o'clock, so it's 2 o'clock now. Let's go. Well, we are going to talk about the Hybrid TESTFEST. This is the first webinar to that TESTFEST. And there will be several speakers here. There will be me, Peter Schmitting. I'm working for InterCor, and within the InterCor project, I'm the activity leader for the activity TESTFEST. And then there will be speakers of the organizers for the Hybrid TESTFEST. This will be Clifford Lonnan of Highways England, who is the project manager for the TESTFEST in the UK team. Then there will be Chris Charlton of WSP as evaluation manager. There will be Trevor Hardy from Transport for London as technical manager. There will be Emir Thomas as the Highways of England security manager, and Jason Burrows of WSP as TESTFEST coordinator. So I'm doing the start of the presentation, and later the other speakers come in. So a little bit of rules for the webinar. The participants of this webinar, you are being muted, but you can ask questions. For that, you have to go to the control panel and type your questions in there. Ideally, you should refer to the slide number in your questions. The slide numbers are found on the upper right corner of each slide. And me as moderator, I will review your questions and from time to time interrupt the presentation of the other speakers whenever it's suitable, and will read out the questions and the presenters will answer to them. The whole webinar will be recorded and later put on the InterCor website. And the questions that you will ask will also be captured and will be posted in some format on the InterCor website also. Okay, let's get started. We have a webinar content. I'm doing the first bit, which is just the introduction to the InterCor project, what it's all about. For some of you, this may be just a repetition. Then Clifford is going to talk about the objectives of the Hybrid TESTFEST and about the test sites. Scenarios will be presented by Chris and Trevor. Amy is going to talk about the security measures. Jason about the schedule and the preconditions. Cliff again about options for the participation, and Jason about the follow-up. And at the end, I'm going to close the presentation with some expected outcome and follow-up. So let's start with the introduction to InterCor. What is it all about? So the InterCor is a study. It is of 4 member states. So the 4 member states basically have corridors of the 10T core road network. which connects the North Sea, the Mediterranean, and the Arc Atlantic corridor. And altogether, that would be more than 1,500 kilometers. InterCor is a CEF project. CEF stands for Connecting Europe Facility, and started in September 2016 and ends end of August 2019. So a 3-year project, and we are a bit more than halfway through. The budget is approximately 30 million euros, where 50% is funded. We have 16 partners from 4 EU member states. Per member state, there's a lead. For the Netherlands, it's the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and the Environment as coordinator of the project. In France, it's the French Ministry for Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy. For Belgium, it's the Flemish Department of Mobility and Public Works, and in UK, it's the Department of Transport. And each of the member states is going to deploy a pilot, so there will be 4 pilot sites in total. And what is the objective of InterCor? It's the idea is to streamline and pilot selected day 1 services, and to show that these CITS services work. And then we have a few freight and logistics services which should be deployed as well. And the idea is to do that via ITS G5 and via cellular communication, so to have a common hybrid architecture. For CITS, there are 4 traffic management services: in-vehicle signage, probe data, roadwork warning, and closer, the green light optimized speed advice. And then we have some freight and logistics services, the multimodal cargo transport optimization, MCTO, and truck parking. Earlier, we had also some tunnel logistics, which were later taken out of the project. And as we're talking about the TESTFEST, there are 4 TESTFEST scheduled. 2 of them have already taken place, or let's say 2.5. We had the ITS G5 TESTFEST last year in the Netherlands, which took place in Dordrecht from July 3 to 6. And there the tests, the services roadworks warning, in-vehicle signage, and probe vehicle data were tested. Then this year in April, we testing PKI, that says security-related issues on the services roadworks warning, IBS, PVD, and closer that took place in Reims from April 23 to 26. And then, as I said, we had 2.5 test fests in preparation to the hybrid test fest, which is the topic of this webinar. There was a pre-test fest which took place June 13 and 14 in Helmond, where the service closer was tested with ITS G5 and cellular. That means in a hybrid communication mode. The upcoming event is the hybrid test fest, which is going to take place in October 2018 in the United Kingdom. The services that are under test are again roadworks warning, IVS, probe vehicle data, and closer. And it will take place from October 8 to 11th. It says 12th here, but on 12th we have a internal InterCor General Assembly, which is not part of the test fest. And the location is going to be UK. It's a bit distributed, and you will hear more about that in the rest of the presentation. And then next year there's going to be a final test fest. It says Belgium, and this is only partly true because it's going to be a distributed event that's going to take place in several of the member states involved in the InterCor project, and it's going to take place in March 2019 over a complete period of 3 weeks, where 2 weeks will be kind of caravanning through Europe, doing testing in France and the UK and the Netherlands, and then a final event in Belgium. And I think that's all I wanted to say. So now I'm handing over the presenter rights, and you will hear the more technical details of this hybrid test fest. Just give me a second to hand over. So hopefully it works. Okay, it's okay, Clifford. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being on the webinar this afternoon. Emily, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to be able to take you through the objectives of the TESTFEST. As the name suggests, we're going to be looking at the two communication systems of ITS-G5 and what services can then be delivered over cellular. As you'll see, going further on, we'll go into much more detail about this as the presentation goes on. You'll be presented with the scenarios that we'll be evaluating against. It will be done in several different ways. We also want to be able to show progression throughout the project, so taking into account what has already previously been tested in the Dutch ITS-G5 TESTFEST, the French PKI TESTFEST, and the pre-TESTFEST that was in June this year in Helmond. So I don't particularly necessarily need to take you through this list, I don't think. I think a lot of you will already be familiar with this, but we will be testing services that I'm sure you're already quite familiar with, such as GLOSA, IBS, roadworks warning, and Pro vehicle data. Some of the services we won't be doing over cellular, such as Pro vehicle data, because we'll only be using version 1 of the interface 2, which is only a unidirectional interface. But the objective of it is to be able to test what services can be delivered over which system, what improvements need to be made to each system to be able to progress it into deployment situation and to be able to gain learning from this. So it's for in-vehicle equipment manufacturers to be able to test them against our infrastructure, and it's also for us to be able to go to mobile network operators and say these are the improvements that might need to be made to the cellular system, to be able to test the cellular against a saturated system and a non-saturated system, so that we'll have a distributed test sites, one that's in central London and one that's further out as well, which I think will be very interesting. We're also going to be doing a direct comparison, running the same services concurrently with static and dynamic scenarios at the same time on one section, so that we can compare both at the same time. So yeah, Emily, could I have the next slide, please? And so, yes, so the test site locations, there are 3 sites that we'll be running from. It's an urban site, a highway site, and a rural site. We'll be testing different services in different ways on all of these sites here. And I think there's a cutout, so I'll talk about the main one and I'll leave it to my my colleagues to be able to discuss the other ones into much more detail, because they're the ones that are responsible for those particular parts. Emily, could you give me the highlight on that? You just click on the slide. Okay. So if you see the little home signal there, this is actually where the venue is. We're going to be running this from a karting center there, and the reason we've chosen this is because it's very close to where we're deploying infrastructure for our main pilot site, which is the A2M2, which runs north from the site. So if you have a look at you can see the home signal running north all the way up there is where we'll be deploying up to 10 ITS-G5 stations. This will also be the part where concurrently we'll be running cellular services as well. So the services we'll be running at this particular part will be the in-vehicle signage and the roadworks warning. And on the ITS-G5, we'll also be doing Pro vehicle data. For the cellular there, it'll be roadworks warning and IVS, and there'll be a mixture of scenarios which we'll go into details later to be able to test these two concurrently. Running south of here is where we'll be doing a international interoperability test, where we'll be simulating a cross-border crossing, so that over cellular only, it'll be the fact that the data will be provided by country A, and then as you go across the border, data will then be provided by country B. And this will be over cellular only. It's a pretty good location. It should be quite accessible to you. We're quite near Dover if you're actually coming across with a vehicle. If you're not coming over to a vehicle and you're going to be getting it in the UK, we're about 15 miles away from Gatwick Airport, which is quite good. Also, it's very near the terminal for the Eurostar as well. So for logistically, it should be quite good. We'll also provide you with a list of hotels that are around the area so that you'll be able to attend and be able to find accommodation quite close to the site. There are several within a couple of miles. So the other sites that I might just mention is the fact, so we have the rural site, which will be running a small closer service on. And I'll let Trevor talk about the urban site, which is in London, where he'll be running several cellular services. The urban site will be running for a whole day's testing up in London. That'll have a sub-venue as well there. It's about a 40-mile drive from the main venue that will be running in Kent. Could I have the next slide, please? So here are some pretty pictures of the site. This is about as pretty as karting centres get. They've got pretty good conferencing facilities. We should be able to fit up to 100 people, no problem at all. The kart is quite extensive. The track itself has about a kilometre of track. We will be able to access this at 15 miles an hour to be able to test an off-road RSU that we'll be providing on the site. We also got in catering there. You know, don't expect anything too special. It will be basic, but it should be fine. We have got exclusive rights to the track all the way through the event in the daytime. So for safety, we felt it was very important that we weren't trying to mix in with normal operational needs, which is why in the end we decided to not use one of our depots, which could have been quite difficult for both of us to be able to operate that. There's plenty of parking. We'll have 2 car parks. There'll be a large car park for people that are visiting and for operational staff, and there'll also be another separate park for technical participants. Yeah, could we have the next slide, please? And right, and then I think we're on to Chris's part. Chris, huh?
Yeah, okay. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Okay, so next slide. Right, as Cliff has introduced, what is quite significant about this TESTFEST is that there are a number of different areas around the southeast, around London and the southeast of England, which in each test site has got a slightly different character and allows us to do different aspects of this particular TESTFEST. So they've been called here Subtest Sites. So the area that Cliff is focused on there around the venue where we're going to hold the event, there's a site to the north which is equipped with both cellular, or covered by cellular, and is also equipped with ITSG5 outstations, RSUs, and to the south an area which is covered only by cellular, but we've set up effectively an artificial cross border so that we can test the way that interface 2 works across borders. So at Subtest Site 1, we've got those things that are listed there. We'll have a look in a bit more detail about what that actually looks like on the road, but we've got speed limits which will leave static for a while, and then we've got some dynamic speed limits that we'll set. There's a roadworks warning as well, and the signage that goes with the roadworks warning, and then pro vehicle data will be collected, but only on ITSG5, as Cliff said. At the site to the south, as you're going south from the event, nothing will happen in country A, but then we'll come to the border, and there'll be some settings on the other side of the border so that you'll know you're actually there. So if we can go to the next slide, we can look at those in detail. Okay, so First of all, going north from the test centre, there's a couple of roundabouts to get onto the motorway, but it is, as Cliff said, very close to the motorway. Effectively going north, we've got a number of gantries. So all of the signs on this TESTFEST have real gantries so that the location is very clear. Some of the tests in London are going to actually have settings on the gantries, but the ones on the A2 and the M2, the Highways England ones, won't. So the signs will all be virtual, but they will correspond with actual gantries on the roadside. So as you get onto the motorway, there's a series of 3 gantries which we can use for speed limits, and then a 4th one where we can remove the speed limit. We'll use that for both static and dynamic speed tests. So I think the idea of the dynamic ones will be that there'll be effectively an update to the speed limit happening whilst you're driving along through the site. And the way that that appears on the dashboard, whether it comes from cellular or from ITS G5, perhaps depending on which arrives first, and what happens to the other signals and that sort of thing will be very clear in the test. So that's useful. And then you'll be able to turn around at the next junction, which is just north of that river you can see on the map. And as you come south, then you enter an area where we'll put scenarios related to roadworks. Effectively, that's about 3/4 of the way down that junction-to-junction section of the motorway. There'll be a 300-kilometre section of roadworks, which will be indicated with the Denham message. And the signs that go around that will effectively replicate what would be on a gantry. And the first will be a preparatory speed limit of 50 miles an hour across all 3 lanes. And then as we come south, the next gantry will show a keep right sign with 50/50 in the other lanes. Actually, some of those areas are actually 4 lanes when you actually get there. The last one, just before the roadworks, will have a red X on lane 1, on the inside lane. So that will effectively mean that lane will be closed as we go through the roadworks. And then on the other side of the roadworks, there'll be a gantry where we'll be able to set an all clear. You'll then be able to rotate around and do the scenarios again, or return to the test center. So that's how that'll work. Next slide. Okay, so this is the setup as we drive south from the test center. This is the that's actually the same site. Sorry, we haven't moved on enough there. So I don't think there's anything to add from that slide, except that it's just repeating those specific scenarios we can set up. Next slide. This is the one for the cross-boundary test. So coming south, again, a couple of roundabouts to get onto the motorway, and then drive through what we're designating as country A, and then you'll come to a border. There'll be no sign set in country A as we're going south. So the first thing we'll see is welcome to country B on a text message sign. Again, there is actually a real VMS sign there, but we won't be able to write anything on it. And then we'll set a 60 mile an hour whilst we're in country B, going towards the next junction. That kind of ensures then that you know that you're there. There'll be a 60 mile an hour speed limit set on the first gantry and come off on the gantry just before the junction. So you'll know you'll be receiving signs related to country B. Turn around at the roundabout again, go north, put the 60 mile an hour back on again, and then at the border, the speed limit will come off, and we'll also then have one sign inside country A, which will say, welcome to country A. Those, in terms of the exact geography, those two signs are in exactly the same place. We may have to just shift one a few meters north just to make sure that it is definitely in the geographic area defined by country A, but they'll effectively look like they're on the same gantry. And then again, you can turn around at the next junction and do it again, or you'll be able to come back down to the test center. I think the next slide will again summarize those. Yeah, so this is about obviously the country-to-country interoperability. There's some discussion about whether or not we might have a country C as well, but I think that'll come out in the next webinar. At the moment, we've just got these two different, these two countries with slightly different geographic areas, both within the UK.
So excuse me to interrupt you.
Sure.
You said about this 3-country idea, because I just had a question from Peter Louilly of the InterCor partner from the Flanders, and he asked if you could test a stretch of motorway like overlapping with a Flemish IF2 country implementation. So maybe that's the idea that goes maybe a bit too far for this webinar, but something that could be elaborated later in an email exchange.
Yeah, I know Cliff has been talking to other parties about the possibility of them also connecting into Interface 2 and providing services that we could drive through. So yeah, Cliff, I no doubt will pick that up.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, hello there, hi, it's Cliff here. Yes, there will be a slide on different ways to be able to technically participate in this later on in the presentation. But yes, certainly one of the ways to participate is to be a cellular provider where you'd be the data provider providing your own service provider and onboard unit. And yeah, so that certainly is an option and something that we would welcome and work with any partner that wanted to be able to provide that.
Okay, I think that's it for site 2. What's next one? Yeah, the raw test site. Okay, this one is slightly different. It's part of a Glosa junction. There might be a photograph of it on the next slide. It's about 10 miles away from the test site. Not sure if the photograph got through, but yeah. So what we have there with the test site on that slide is you can see the same sort of schematic diagram of what we'll encounter. I'll leave the test site, like I say, it's about 10 miles away on an A road, not a motorway, and then we'll turn around, and the site is just coming north back towards the test center, and it's a very simple junction with a main road and a side junction which is demand responsive. So if vehicles want to come in from the left there, then they will they will get an indicator on the traffic light to change it. But because it's quite a quiet road, it means that mostly it'll be on a time sequence. So when we might be able to affect that as well on the day as well. So what it means is effectively we're running Glosa on a fairly simple junction with to a large extent a time sequence, which means Glosa should be very easy to predict when the time to green and should give a good result for a Glosa site. Just the one site though there in the Kent area. Next slide. Oh yeah, there's the photograph. I thought I was there somewhere. So you can see as you drive through the side road there coming from the left, and most of the time that will be on green, but occasionally we'll get the red, and we should be able to predict when that is most of the time. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, now the question is Trevor with us?
I hope I am. Yes, there we go. It says I'm talking. Good afternoon, everyone. If we can have the next slide. So the urban test site is about 30 miles up from the test centre on the A2, on the Transport for London stretch of road that goes from effectively just up from the M25 all the way in towards the Blackwall Tunnel. If you want to go on to the next slide for me. So on the London test site, the Subtest site, we've got the 3 different services that we'll be testing. So we've got Glosa, 4 different junctions, 1 on the A2 and the other 2 just off of the trunk road. We've also got a series of IVS and a roadworks warning scenario as well. The drive time to the test centre is very dependent on traffic conditions. It's about 30 miles all the way up to the Blackwall Tunnel portal. Driving time, depending on conditions, can be anything from half an hour up to about 45 minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, so this shows a little bit more detail on the urban test site, showing both our Glosa sites and the IVS and roadworks warning. So coming northbound from the test centre, once you get into the TfL road area, we've got a number of free text BMS signs, which will form a roadworks warning scenario. Those will be virtual. We might be looking at able to have some aerial message on the first sign but we'll be looking at that a little bit nearer the time. Just off from the Sun in the Sands roundabout, we have 3 Gloucester junctions, which are actually on the section of road that's used to start the London Marathon every year. And the idea is you'll be able to progress through those 3 to the roundabout and then effectively return back towards the A2 to head north or south. Heading north towards the depot, we will have a section of real IVS messages sets, a real gantry sign set with effectively the main speed limit for the road. So we'll have those, and there's I think about 4 or 5 gantries up to the point where we get off for the depot location for brakes and facilities. There's plenty of car parking at the depot. It's just south of the Blackwall Tunnel portal, so there's plenty of facilities there that we can use to let people compare results and then look at going out and repeating some of the scenarios. Heading south from there, we have a virtual IVS section. So again, we have a series of gantries running down towards the Sun in the Sands roundabout, which will be pushing over the cellular interface. The Sun in the Sands roundabout, obviously people can get off there southbound and revisit and reloop that northern section of the test area a number of times if necessary. Next slide. Can we have the slides?
I pick up. Where's Trevor? Yeah. Okay. Well, next slide. Yeah. Okay. So that's really just a summary of everything we've talked about the different services and which of the sites they will be available on. There's not. I think we've probably covered most of the things that we know at this stage. I think it would be just worth mentioning a couple of things about the differences that might be in the profiles for the UK. Don't forget that we'll be driving on the left, and that might affect some of the content of the messages, and also that we'll be displaying speed limits in miles per hour, and that's worth taking into account as well. Things like divert, the keep right sign as you go through the roadworks actually means keep in lane 2 and lane 3. So, but apart from that, I think that summarises where we're at with the scenarios.
Afternoon all, it's Emery here. Security then. To a large extent, this has been demonstrated and proven under the French PKI test back in TESTFEST in April. Our intention really here is to take forward as much learning from the success of the French TESTFEST and to embed that in our TESTFEST. But it's important to note that cybersecurity is not the primary objective of this TESTFEST. So the solutions that we're looking at are predominantly here to provide us with an understanding that security is an integral part of the overall solution. We need a reasonable degree of security, but what we want to get to is a sort of solution that encourages maximum participation and reduces the amount of overhead for participants when they're communicating with our solution. So keep it simple is the mantra really from a security perspective. To that extent, this presentation is looking at more of the interoperability requirements rather than how we've secured our back office systems, for example. So moving forward from the French TESTFEST in April, we will continue to use the certificate format as specified in TS 103097 version 1.2.1, which we hope will encourage maximum participation. Have we just lost comms? Can everybody still hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Yes.
Our intention, therefore, is to develop a standalone UK hybrid TESTFEST trust domain purely for the purposes of this TESTFEST and won't be interoperable with any other trust domain. We will have a manual distribution process for distributing the keys. We'll provide more information on that in due course and how you will enroll and how you will receive certificates and what you need to do to get hold of those certificates effectively. But there will be a manual distribution process. There won't be an online sort of dynamic issuing service. And we won't be introducing anything adventurous like certificate verification lists or trust lists. There'll be a single, very flat trust list effectively for the purposes of this trial. We will expire, or we'll set all the certificates to expire at the end of the trial, which will be a way of effectively revoking the use of the service at the end of the TESTFEST. So that's effectively what we're doing for ITS G5. The next slide is on cellular security. So following on from the previous point on keeping it simple, and as Cliff mentioned in his previous slides on the scenarios, participation will be limited to certain types of cellular participation. So that will be coming as a service provider and a OBU or as a data service provider. So interoperability requirements as far as the onboard unit are concerned are limited. It's the only sort of interface requirements that need security consideration really are the communications between the interchange nodes and the service providers to share that information. We are proposing to develop a baseline security specification, baseline specification that will also include security solution to define exactly what we're going to be doing for configuration and communication with our back office systems. In terms of what we're delivering from a cellular perspective, in the absence of any established security solution for the cellular link from the service provider to the onboard unit, we're looking to align it as far as reasonably possible with existing industry best practice for securing cellular services, which is broadly following commercial services that we consume every day. We won't be looking to introduce anything novel or niche here. We'll be looking at securing the communications network rather than looking at the individual messages and signing individual messages, which is the case within ITS G5. And that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Thanks.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jason Burrows, WSP. Just run through some of the logistics and the preconditions. Schedule. As has been discussed, there are 3 sites: rural, motorway, and urban. And so we very much set the schedule up to facilitate travel to the urban site, which will be on the Wednesday, sandwiched between 2 test days on the Tuesday and on the Thursday, whereby we'll be undertaking local testing at the rural site and at the 2 motorway sites, subsite 1 and subsite 2, as Chris has explained. So starting with Monday, that's about setting up, establishing comms and testing. We've got the basic services so we can deliver on the Tuesday, the Wednesday and the Thursday. The timings for arrival aren't set in stone. As I said, this is a structure, the structure for the week. The structure's right. Those tests will be carried out on those days, but we anticipate that the arrival setup time and the closing time might change slightly, but more information will be provided on that. During each day, Tuesday, for example, there will be 2 sessions, starting with a daily briefing prior to each session for health and safety purposes and to describe the objectives of the scenarios. And that will be followed by a late afternoon debriefing session, 2-way. During both the local tests, i.e. the Tuesday and the Thursday, the M2 technical team, including Kent County Council and Highways England, will be available to support participants. The same on the Wednesday, when the morning at least will be devoted to travelling to London. The technical team from TfL will be available to support participants. I think that's the schedule largely covered. Thanks, Emily. Can I have the next slide, please? Preconditions. So I'm not going to run through these one by one, but the first 5 relate to health, safety and well-being. So the plan is for us to have an always staffed front desk with daily registration for all participants, very important. By signing in each morning, you will be signing up to compliance with the rules of engagement that we'll produce, compliance with UK legislation, and confirming that you have read and understood all the terms and conditions and you've completed the relevant risk assessments. All these will be provided. Number 6, everyone's welcome, but everyone needs to be registered. We expect the event to be very popular, and we aim to facilitate all who wish to register. Now, the places are limited, and that's constrained by the venue size. And if we're oversubscribed, we'll have to make places available based upon the registration details that you provide, and within that, the scope of your participation. And Cliff will come on to this in a slide shortly about options for participation. But at this moment in time, we're quite confident that we can facilitate all participants who will register. Can I have the next slide, please, Emily? So slide 7 and 8. Yes, UK partners will host the event and provide catering and facilities throughout the day. High quality catering and facilities, I hasten to add. All other costs will be borne by the participants, including the provision of a vehicle and all the ancillary equipment you would expect to take part in this event. 9 to 10, these preconditions relate to the headline objectives of InterCor, so to demonstrate large-scale interoperable deployment, and in particular the objectives of TESTFEST, so to validate the specifications as part of interoperability testing. So we need to be ETSI compliant, and we need to share test data in a common format. Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please? There we are. It's Cliff now. Thanks, Cliff.
Hello again. So there are 3 basic ways that we would want you to technically participate. So for the cellular minimum, we would require you to have an onboard unit and an associated service provider. We would want you then to have a subscription to country A and country B. This is so that you can participate in the interoperability test, the cellular and ITS comparison test that will be running on the motorway, and also for the site with Transport for London. The minimum services that you would need to have operating on your onboard units would be GLOSA, roadworks warning, and IVS. At the moment, we'll be running to the Dutch profiles that are already familiar from the TESTFEST and the InterCor standards that have already been in there, but we'll be able to give you more details in webinar 2. There is an extra option for cellular, and you would still need to subscribe to country A, but in the same location as we'll be providing country B data, you would be able to provide your own data simulated services. So you would need to run the same services that we were operating in country B, but this would be from your own simulated service. It may also be beneficial if other partners might have access to your country's data as well, if we were going to run it that way. If you're coming with an ITS G5 only unit, then we would require you to have an onboard unit, an HMI, so that you could run your closer service, the roadworks warning, the IBS, speed advisory and free text, and also probe vehicle data there. If there's any variation to this, is not the fact that we're against it, but we would need to discuss with you, and I would then need to go back to our system providers to be able to see whether there's any other way that we could accommodate you. So I do want to maximize participation in this event, but this is what we would be looking for from our primary participants.
Jason again. Thanks, Cliff. Next slide, please, Emily. So next steps. So this webinar has been all about the high-level explanation of the what, the when, and the how. The second webinar will provide more detail and indeed provide for those integral documents you would expect, the standard suite documentation. So we can see those here, the technical aspects, the baseline spec, the login formats, participant forms, indeed FAQs from this seminar, and the action plan, which we will have a draft of by next week. So all of these documents will be available from the 20th of August for follow-up on webinar 2, which I believe is on the 3rd of September. Probably on the next slide, please. Yes, as we know, registration is now open. Registration closes 31st of August, but I would strongly recommend you register now if you haven't already, not least because of the holiday period and the availability of some key staff. It would be very helpful to get early site registration. As I said, second webinar is planned for the 3rd. We've got a face-to-face meeting planned that very same week in London, kindly hosted by TfL. And we will provide details for some basic remote testing early October. We anticipate that to be on the 3rd of October. We'll confirm that as part of the delivery of the integral documentation in August. Next slide, please. Peter, thank you.
Okay, I have to thank you, all the presenters, to highlight all the aspects of this TESTFEST, at least on a high level. And let's come to the questions. I have to say the attendees have been very modest or timid and have not asked many questions. Basically, there's a few questions. There's the one of Peter Gauplomme. He asked if sample messages for all services will be made available prior to the TESTFEST event. So I guess that's probably for some practicing in the own lab. Have you foreseen that in earlier TESTFESTs? We had the samples put on the internet side of InterCor also.
So it's come here. Yes, we can provide sample PCAP files, traces of the messages.
And again, I'll add to that, Jason. We anticipate this to be the early October, once we've completed our own internal testing, and we are going through a dry run of the event. So yeah, likely to be the 3rd of October to be confirmed.
Okay, so that means yes, and this will be available early October. Then there's a question of Bastian Wissing of Vitron. It's I don't know on which slide it is, but I guess it's something on PKI. It is to clarify, does that mean that all the units will fall under the same AA and root for ITS G5 security? I guess.
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, to confirm that is correct. We will be issuing certificates from the same AA and Group CA.
Okay. Good. Then there's a question about the timing. On slide 38, it says closing test center. That's on the schedule. The test center is closing at 6 o'clock, and the question is, will the services be running also after that, so that people can go for a test run at night? And also, will the motorway use case be running also on the Wednesday when there's the London testing, so that people could choose where to go?
So Jason here. So in answer to the Wednesday question, not on the Wednesday, but we are certainly considering running the additional tests or keeping the service available on the other days. We'll get back to you with further information on that.
And then the next question is by Bruno Carbon, and it says, well, can we participate only as OBU supplier, or is it possible to participate as RSU supplier? I think the idea was to also allow RSU suppliers. Can you confirm that, please?
Bear with us, Peter. We're just having a brief discussion.
Okay. So let's wait for that discussion. Anyway, there's another question that's maybe two other people, and this is a question of Fred Wewe from the Netherlands. And it's, is the TESTFEST only open for teams who will be testing, or also for visitors watching? I think our idea was to have it open for InterCor partners also for watching, but not for external partners to have observers only that are not part of the InterCor project.
That was our understanding as well, Peter. And with regards the previous question, can we take that one away regarding the RSU and participation and get back to you on that?
Yes. So you have an answer to that with the RSU?
It's just, sorry, to repeat myself, Peter. Can we take that question away, please, and come back within a few days, give you an answer?
Okay. So
the RSU.
So we will have to answer to Bruno then in a few days. Okay, good.
Thank you.
So that are all the questions we are having right now. So dear attendees, don't be shy. If you want to know something, of course, afterwards, you can always send me an email. My email address is in the slides there, which will be posted on the InterCor website as well. And then you can contact me and I will distribute it to the technical people that can answer your questions. Okay, there's another question that came in. From Joël Ensminger or Ensminger, I don't know if it's French or not. So it's where to find further information regarding national context of those TESTFEST about cooperative ITS deployment in UK and further phases. It's not a technical question. I guess you can start with the InterCor website. As a starting point on that. Then there's a question of, that's more InterCor internal question of Axel Sandberg, if we can get the sheets of the webinar. Of course, the webinar will be posted on the InterCor website. And for Axel, we will also post it on the internal project place pages so that he can have a look at it.
can I just add to that, Peter, will be part of the action plan. We'll be providing a list of contacts for UK partners to include the strategic partners, the InterCor strategic partners. So, yeah, we can make some information available through the action plan.
Okay, good. Thank you. So it seems that are the questions, but we are 5 minutes to 3. I think we said we're going to go for 1 hour. So last chance to ask some questions, please. Well, so there are two ways. Either we have been very clear on everything, or we put everybody into stunned silence. So anyway, as I already said, if you come up with some questions in the next days, feel free to send me an email and I will forward it with the, well, now you should see my email address there on the screen. You can also contact Cliff, of course. He's the, or best would be if you send your emails to both of us, so no information gets lost, because it's holiday period and we won't be in service all the time. So that's the plan. So, well, there are no more questions coming in, so I would say we can close this webinar. So I want to thank all the presenters for giving all this information about the TESTFEST event. So to all the attendees, I want to thank you for your joining this webinar, and the next webinar, as you've seen, is going to take place on the 3rd of September. This will be more technical, with details on the test scenarios and the test cases that will be deployed during the TESTFEST. And so, do the other presenters want to add anything, or are you fine?
I'd just like to add, Jason here, I'd just like to add, we're looking forward to welcoming you all on the 5th to the, sorry, get the date right would be helpful, the 8th to the 11th of October. We're looking forward to the event. We think with your support, participation, it will be a successful event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the last question from Peter Louiley. Are there any meetings planned for the Friday? Yes, on Friday there will be the InterCor Internal General Assembly, so you can make your travel arrangements accordingly. Okay, so that was it then. The first webinar to the InterCor Hybrid TESTFEST to be held in October 8 to 11 in the UK. Thank you all for your participation, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again at the next webinar in September, and then finally to meeting you all in October. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.